Hello and welcome to Blockchain Gaming World, episode 50. Yes, we've got to half a century already. Doesn't time fly? I'm your host, John Jordan. You can find me on Twitter at BlockchainGMG. And with me this week, I'm talking to James Mayo, who is the navigator and sometimes president, I think he's being modest, of 8 Circuit Studios in Seattle. How are things going, James?
Oh, very good, John. Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Good. So we first met in London at the start of the year, start of 2019. The year has zoomed through. We're over halfway through now. And you guys have been really busy, lots of things going on. So we're going to spend a bit of time, the majority of our time, we'll be talking about what you guys are up to. But always good, I guess, to give some context to the person I'm talking to. So you've been in games for a long time. I don't think we need to go through all your history of games because that might take an entire podcast in and of itself. But can you give us like a potted history of what you've done in games and how that kind of segued into blockchain and 8 Circuit?
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. Most of our background sort of splits into like two different categories from the games industry. One is on the publishing side, since this would be companies like Nintendo and Microsoft.
Small companies like that.
Yeah, and then I've been doing it for quite a while. It really ages me. I was at Nintendo when they did the transition from 8-bit, the NES system, all the way to the 16-bit system, the Super Nintendo system. And then at Microsoft went from when they transitioned from PC and first we're getting into consoles. That was the very first Xbox. And a lot of the team has very similar stories. And we sort of been working in the triple A hemisphere for a number of years, so about 15 to 20 years or so. And my background's really in production, so that schedules, budgets, and resources, and just love developing games, telling stories, and I think for us, it's this great fusion between the creative and the technical, and what happens when you bring these sort of two disciplines together. And the blockchain has been super fascinating. I think for most of us, sort of in the, I don't know, what was it say, 2013, 2014. I think it was just pre-games. I think most of us were sort of ideologically oriented around blockchains for what it meant in terms of the financial system and being able to opt out of a potentially, maybe we call it unstable system, or some might even go so far as to say corrupt system. But it was just sort of this new way of playing in the hemisphere of finance and money. So um, so I don't know, what was like 2016 or so. I'd been in it long enough to start getting kind of frustrated, to be honest, around a lot of the conversations that was less about, how do we make this easy for people to use and get people out of the shaky system. And it was much more about moons and Lambos. So so yeah, I got a bunch of my buddies together, and we were sort of talking about it, thinking like, well, what could we do to help contribute? I was just like, oh, it's kind of obvious. Like, we know how to build games. We love blockchains, and so it's like chocolate and peanut butter. We thought, well, maybe there's something there, and our road to blockchain game development started. So it was about 2017. That's when we first created 8 Circuit Studios, and we've just been cranking on this crazy roller coaster ever since.
So you come together, people who are experienced in making games, which a lot of people in the blockchain space are not. There's room for everyone, but a lot of the people even now have been kind of more the blockchain enthusiasts rather than people with 20 years experience in making games. But when you kind of sit down, you're enthusiastic about blockchain, you love making games. What are the obvious things? You don't necessarily want to spend 5 years making a AAA kind of game. You want to get some product out there. How did that kind of play out? What did you decide that you wanted to do?
Yeah, well, so I think we kind of naively went in assuming that you could just sprinkle blockchains onto games and it'd work out great. And a lot of our learning was, I think, what the industry also sort of concluded, which is how painful it can be to deal with sort of we call it transaction viscosity, but basically it's high high transaction numbers and its effect on the price of transactions, and sort of just the inefficiencies of this new way of managing data, at least new for us in terms of how we were using it. And so, the big thing that oftentimes you'll see folks running into is putting logic or game logic on the blockchain. And so you think about CryptoKitties sort of as the exemplar of this. Um, the challenges that you run into when having that kind of logic on a blockchain make for pretty rough user experience. Um, and then there's sort of the variability with the fees that can be confusing. And the crypto crowd's pretty. I mean, they're resilient. They got a high tolerance for pain, but on the gaming side, man, if you could give somebody a free game and they're complaining about their experience, and they didn't even pay for it. So classic sort of gamer approach to, yeah, you're getting in the way of my fun, and now I'm mad about it. So it's definitely sort of a tolerance variance between the two groups. Um, and so we ran into that though. We had to learn this hard lesson a couple of times. And so our very first title that we released was a mobile title called Alien Arsenal: Battle for the Blockchain. We were doing a bunch of fancy stuff with it, but we realized we needed to create sort of this big infrastructure. You think of it like a clutch between an engine and a drivetrain, where you kind of have to have this intermediary system to connect games to the blockchain and handle a lot of the transaction challenges that you're faced with. So we did that. We released Alien Arsenal, sort of a technical prototype. For us, we got a ton out of that, and probably one of the biggest takeaways was working with Apple, because we'd released it on the App Store, and we'd also released it on the Google Play Store. Um, and anybody who's released mobile knows it's Google Play is pretty tolerant, and Apple can be a bit challenging to navigate. But we had great experiences with Apple. Once they sort of understood that we weren't, a scam, or that we weren't trying to run, our own cryptocurrency, they got super interested in what we were doing. So that was a really fruitful conversation. So we had really good experiences with working with Apple, because I think they really wanted to understand what this new blockchain game phenomena was.
Mhm. It's interesting the mobile side because that's my background. Really focused on mobile games, free to play mobile games, and it is interesting because obviously with mobile you have this absolutely enormous reach. Potentially 2 billion people. So mobile's great for that, and mobile is you have to be really accessible. You have to really kind of spoon feed it. You have to, which is good for the product, I think. Um, but then clearly you have these massive issues around how the how the gatekeepers work, how the app stores work, particularly how they get their 30%. So often you kind of see these quite convoluted kind of transaction mechanics or economies that allow you to bring in blockchain items as long as you pay with, for the app stores, which kind of makes sense. So do you feel because there's some people who very strongly kind of feel that blockchain will games will drive blockchain adoption, and mobile games are the big thing for games in terms of like scale. So that will be the adoption route for the first big blockchain games. Do you think that's feasible, or are just the kind of the obstacles kind of too big?
I do. I think actually mobile is one of the best sort of vectors to try and bridge the non-blockchain gamer with blockchains and get them using it. Um, I think the other lesson that we took away is that it's important for us to play to our strengths. And we've all kind of dabbled in mobile before, worked on some mobile titles, but it's definitely not our strength. Um, there's a lot of competition as well, and so I think for us, we kind of realized, man, we would love to be able to develop an awesome mobile title, because it is, for all those reasons that you mentioned, just this great opportunity uh, onboarding people into the blockchain. But we also recognize too when we're swimming against the current. So um, yeah, it's we're kind of longingly looking over at the mobile side, but again, playing to our strengths. I think we learned that lesson from Alien Arsenal as well. That I don't think we were going to be too competitive in that space. Uh, so we just directed all resources into well, to start into PC development, but eventually we'll get to Xbox and PlayStation. But yeah, so we're the biggest cheerleaders for anybody in mobile making headway there. Um, Pretty awesome to watch.
Which brings us nicely onto Project Genesis, which is your the main thing you guys are up to. It's your big kind of AAA PC uh, console in future kind of game. So I guess the headline is space combat with first person shooter elements. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's another good one where we learned some tough lessons. So before Alien Arsenal, we actually had we'd started Project Genesis as what's called it's called a roguelike game, but it's kind of this overhead ship. And if you ever played FTL, Faster Than Light, sort of an homage to that. But we were going to do a fully 3D version using the Unreal Engine. Um, and it's also a style of game that none of us had ever worked on before. And it just wasn't working. We were having a really tough time sort of finding the fun. We kind of knew what we wanted to do on the blockchain, but yeah, we couldn't ever cross that threshold into, wow, we really like the gameplay mechanics that we've organized here. So after Alien Arsenal, we rebooted Project Genesis, and all our backgrounds, or most of our backgrounds, come from first person shooter, and we have some space combat experience as well. It's like, well, why don't we kind of mash these two genres together and see if we can really play with the player's sense of scale. So kind of these epic giant space maps, and then really close quarters deck to deck first person shooter fighting. We didn't really know if it was going to work or not, and we have this sort of connective tissue called the breach and board mechanic. It's basically, if you're flying in space, you can target these giant capital ships. You pinpoint a vulnerable area on their hull, and then you start the breach and board mechanic, which is launching this small assault pod. You breach the hull, and into first person space combat, or excuse me, first person combat you go. Um, and we prototyped it for a bit, and all of a sudden it became super fun uh, through that experimentation, and so we knew we had something at that point, and just started leaning into it. So most of the content that you'll see us release, and we do quite a bit on Twitter, um, it sort of showcases our development process as we sort of elaborate on our findings.
It's kind of interesting. So space combat, obviously a whole bunch of games have done that. It's very
Mm-hmm.
certain kind of genre you expect something from. First person shooters, obviously, pretty well worn kind of genre as well, with some pretty high standards to meet up to, some kind of stuff you're going to get compared to, particularly working on Unreal.
That's right.
Putting the two together, well, that's kind of interesting hybridization. We kind of like that in games, but in terms of from a production point of view, that's you're effectively making kind of at least, if not, pretty much two games in one. So that's like a lot of big ships and a lot of and then a lot of very detailed environments,
That's right.
and a really good kind of kind of movement, kind of combat model.
Mm-hmm.
Just from a game point of view, that's pretty ambitious. You're a pretty small team. I guess you call yourself an indie.
That's right.
Um, how have you kind of tried to keep the ambition but not be killed by the ambition?
Ah, that's a great point, John. We one of the things that I think that we've also discovered as we've looked at the broader market is that we got really clear about the mechanics that we wanted to adopt. And I think that was the most important thing, is figuring out what of space combat do we want to distill down to its essence in terms of experience, and then what of first person combat do we want to distill. And actually first person's pretty easy. There's a lot of uh, headway that we can make, because of course Unreal was actually originally designed for first person. So the stretching that we have to do is a little bit on the space combat side. But yeah, I think we just got really clear about the type of experience that we wanted. It's not it's leaning more towards arcade and less uh, towards simulation on the space side. And then we come from sort of the Halo Destiny gameplay model of first person combat, so it's almost sort of an intuitive sense for us and how to make some good progress there. And I think we were a little uh, apprehensive because you really never know if the market's going to like what you're producing. It's like, does this even work? Um, but we started holding these sort of, I guess, what would they be? Private or closed play tests with our community. So we got 5 to 6,000 people in our community, and sort of getting the build out in their hands, which is has been again another learning for us. It's kind of verboten when you're coming from the publisher side to get early builds into people's hands, but I think we're really embracing this sort of open kitchen development. But after getting people in and playing, there was a lot of kind of comments around, well, this feels like Star Citizens, and that's super surprising to us. Or what was the other game? Star Wars Battlefront 2, the 2005 version. And I think what we've sort of learned, we didn't intend this, but it was great to sort of discover it. I think for Star Citizen, we scratch a kind of itch, which is people there's a lot of people who really enjoy sort of the epic scale and scope of Star Citizen, but there are others who were just looking to get in and start running amok, getting into space combat. And I think that, in addition to sort of a more nostalgic approach that people were looking for from Star Wars Battlefront, these two groups have kind of informed us that we seem to be on the right track. And so that's been pretty exciting. And so with that kind of feedback, it actually makes it pretty easy. It gives us our North Star and helps us keep the scope down, because we can almost instantly understand what it is that people are really vibing on.
And it is really interesting, as you say. You are very active on Twitter, and you're doing these tests all the time, and there's kind of videos going on of some of it's playtest stuff, some of it's kind of new things you're kind of showing in the build, there is this kind of openness, which is lovely to see. You don't talk very much about the blockchain side of things. So why is that the case? And how you're a blockchain game as well. So how do you kind of balance those two things?
Yeah, that's another really good point. So I think I'm trying to remember when it was. We made a pretty hard decision to focus fully on gaming, and I'm trying to think about when that was. Feels like it was like maybe 2 or 3 months ago. Um, we were sort of doing a couple of things actually behind the scenes. So one of the things that we were doing was talking to publishers, traditional game development publishers, um, and a lot of the sort of common knowledge, I guess, at the time on the crypto side was talking about real digital ownership. Was talking about the way in which you can own your own stuff, and sort of uh, enter into like a secondary market where you could trade, and an emphasis on scarcity. And in our conversations with publishers, we were finding that fell pretty flat. Like they weren't really interested in that at all. And again, this is pure game development publishers, and not blockchain, not those that were interested in blockchain development. Um, and so we were like, that's super interesting. We thought that might be a draw for them, that they would be interested in that, and that they'd be excited to get into blockchain. Um, but turns out that I think the blockchain is sort of a risk vector for publishers. It's kind of a big question mark. It's an unknown, and I think they don't really know how to think about it. Um, and so for us, I think what we realized was, well, that must also apply to gamers too. Kind of turned out to be the case that gamers, when we're talking to them about real digital ownership or scarcity, they don't they don't really care. They're like, well, why don't I just play the game? Like I already own my stuff. And we found that there was this this dissonance between they didn't realize that they don't really own their stuff on Fortnite. because they can get in and play it, and it's theirs as far as they're concerned. And so trying to educate them about, hey, you don't really own that, was beating our heads against the wall. So we just decided, well, let's actually just shift fully into game development. We have to be successful as a game anyways if we want to achieve our goal of sort of operating as a bridge, pulling people uh, into blockchains and cryptocurrency more broadly. So let's do that. And so a lot of our tone and approach when you're hearing from us is really game focused. And then the on the crypto side, like we're talking with a lot of our colleagues in the space, and we can resume having those kinds of conversations around crypto, around ownership, around ways in which we can provide value to players using the blockchain. So we're pretty like we call it pretty articulated approach that's kind of backwards in terms of what we're emphasizing on the blockchain. Um, we use the Ethereum blockchain. We really like that one. I think that it's got the most support. Uh, the number of developers on that's astronomical compared to other blockchains. Um, so yeah, where I think we're seeing our colleagues focus on ownership, which I think is a good thing to focus on, and the decentralized nature of blockchains. We're veering really hard in the other direction. Um, and so for ownership, it's actually the last priority for us because we think that you have to. Again, this is for us and how we're doing game development. We think that you have to approach it. Um, uh, Blockchain development by making using the blockchain so valuable that ownership is sort of an afterthought. In fact, we feel like we're doing it right if players are really conflicted about whether or not they want to give up their favorite item or avatar or property, real estate deed. So we start with persistence. That's the core priority for us. And then from there, interoperability. So that's the ability to move that asset between games. There's some really interesting stuff happening at the third tier, which is access. So we've seen that with like Decentraland and CryptoKitties. They sort of had this ability to access elements of their game experience if you had the correct kind of CryptoKitty token. And then for us, the final one, this is sort of the secret sauce for us, is mutation. And I don't think we've seen too much with folks mutating their tokens or their digital assets. And then finally, it's ownership.
So in terms of where you are in the project at the moment, you're doing these kind of these kind of closed game tests. You've fairly recently been added to Steam in terms of you can be added to wish lists now. Do you have a formal kind of launch schedule yet, or is that still a bit early for you?
We're somewhat variable in our approach to dates. So along with us shifting pretty heavy into just focusing on building the game and articulating our plans, in sort of whatever the current milestone is. The open kitchen development model that we've got actually is pretty forgiving when it comes to the dates. But we are intending on having an open alpha sometime sort of, let's call it late August. We're playing a little loose with the term alpha. From my experience, like a real legitimate alpha would be something like a code complete. Basically, all the features are coded. Then beta is content complete. That means that then you've got all of the assets in the game. We use that term a little bit differently on the game side, but so it'd be like graphics, sounds, refined game balance. Those kinds of mechanics are finally polished. Um, uh, but release is sort of the final stage, and we're targeting mid to late 2020.
You are quite a way off then.
That's right. But here's the thing about this open kitchen development is that you get the build into the community and then eventually your customers' hands um, pretty early. And so this is what they'll call on like Steam. They'll call it early access, and there's quite a degree of difference in how people choose to or how complete their game is that they choose to release. Um, but I think we've got sort of our core mechanics, so you should be able to get access into our game sometime September, um, if you're looking for a little bit more robust play.
And what does that mean in terms of you've been talking to publishers? You're kind of obviously you got a year out before the earliest you're going to be kind of launching something, but obviously you need to have that kind of commercial plan sorted out in the meantime. Are you actively in that space?
We're actively in the space. Yeah, and so that I think also has an impact. So I think if you're looking at it, like if there's a couple of ways to think about it. So if we stay indie, actually, anybody will be able to get a hold of the game. We're thinking probably late August. So that should be pretty quick. That's what, like 2 or 3 months away. Wait, time is, yeah, it's about 2 months away. Been working in the
I
salt
can
mines too much,
say.
John. So then the publisher can, they're going to have their own timeline. They're going to have their own place in which we fit within their portfolio if they decide that this is a game that they're interested in picking up. Um, and we're kind of seeing that the general preference is sometime late 2020 for sort of this what we call mid core, maybe single A game development.
And how much do you think the sentiment in the blockchain world will impact the kind of commercial deals you can make? Because we kind of see, I guess we had end of 2018, we had this kind of big crunch, big crash, and all the kind of finished off 2018 in terrible style in terms of
Right.
kind of Bitcoin price. And then this week we've had this kind of really weird, like whatever it was, up like 30-40% in a short period of time, and then down again. And did that kind of stuff? Obviously, you're not in control of that at all. But I mean, do you think, say, in 6 months' time or a year's time, the whole blockchain thing could be seen as a lot more serious and something that all publishers need to be thinking about rather than still, as it is currently, a kind of a bit of an oddity that only kind of weird, kind of techie focused people are into?
And I would love to say that publishers are going to see the light and really start, seeing what blockchain gaming is about. But there is almost no appetite in our experience for blockchain game development. Um, I think that's the other thing that has been a bit perplexing. I thought, with games, especially sort of the smaller publishers, mid-core publishers, and smaller, one of their biggest one of their biggest advantages is being able to sort of be on the cutting edge of tech and innovation. Um, they're willing to take more risks, but I think even at this point, they're looking at game development, as risky in and of itself. And so the technology is a bit. I think it might also be a bit concerning when you look at sort of their business model, generally speaking. I mean, if you're used to doing walled garden live games where you can just print as much of your own currency as you want, you can make as many of your virtual goods as you want, um, to create scarcity that then you have no control over, and that then is profitable for people who are playing on or using a secondary market. I think there's probably a big question mark for them. Like, why would we want to do that? It's just taking money away from ourselves. Um, so that's the sense that I get talking to publishers. So it might. One of the things that we're hoping is that we can demonstrate a successful business model. And unfortunately, by the time we do that, then we won't need a publisher. Um, but if we can do that, then perhaps that'll open the door for other game developers who are doing blockchain game development. So we hope that if nothing else, we can help our colleagues while helping ourselves.
Cool, excellent. Well, half an hour's up. I think we've covered a lot of stuff. We could go on for another half an hour, but I think it's probably half an hour's a good one. We can always come back in a few months' time and dig into some more details. So, if people want to get hold of you, how can they find you? What are the best options?
Yeah, check me out on Twitter. It's Jim Mayo. Or if you want to sign up and get on the list so that you can participate in the open alpha, or even some of the earlier builds, to be a part of our pilot program, check out projectgenesis.com, and you just sign up there and we'll get you on the list.
You can add to the wish list. Got it right this time on Steam as well.
That's right. Thanks for that reminder, John. I appreciate that. Steam would kill me if I didn't mention that. Yeah.
You did a bit of research beforehand. You added it to my wish list. I got it wrong that time. So cool. Thank you very much, James. A pleasure having you on.
I think that's it. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much for listeners. Any comments? You can find me on Twitter. I'm blockchain GMG. If you want a visual version of this, go and check us out on YouTube at blockchain GMG. We'll put all the links to all the Twitter and all the web stuff in the notes as well. But thanks for listening. Come back next week. Find out what's going on in the world of blockchain games.